This now is Head of Policy at Reform UK, Zia Yusuf. Zia, thank you very much for joining us this morning. What's your reaction to the shrinking British economy?
Good morning. Well, it's been framed as a surprise, but it really isn't a surprise. If you observe how this Labour government have been running the economy, there are a bunch of incompetents who, in the entire cabinet, no one has any experience of creating value in the economy, growing an economy, making decisions in the private sector. They're basically continuing what the Tories did for 14 years, endless deficits, lots of borrowing, debt going up, endless increases in the size of the state and state spending, and then a big deficit, a quote, black hole. How do you fund that black hole? You raise taxes on the people watching this program, the contributors and the grafters, who are then disincentivized to do it. And now, to compound matters, we've also had a continuation of instability. Miriam was just making the point about, if you look in the detail of that 0.1%, which kind of might sound abstract and boring, the first point I would make is that we've now only had growth in the economy in one of the last 7 months in this country. The population explosion does continue. It's still hundreds of thousands in terms of net immigration, which means GDP per capita, which we think is the only stat that matters from a GDP perspective. How wealthy is each person in the country getting? Well, actually, they continue to get poorer. There's been huge political instability. Most people in the business world think Rachel Reeves has already delivered her last budget. Obviously, the Tories had 3 chancellors in, I think it was 3.5 months, 6 prime ministers in 8 years. There's even more instability now, or just as much at least, with Keir Starmer. And what that means is, if you're an international capital allocator or even a business here in the UK, as Miriam said, you're going to hold back on making really important long cycle investment decisions. So that means those jobs don't get created. And the final point I want to make is that Rachel Reeves appears to be absolutely flabbergasted that she has made employing people more expensive by increasing the national insurance contribution of an employer by 2% and making it more risky by bringing in, what we term the unemployment rights bill, and seems to be shocked that businesses are going to employ fewer people. We have unemployment in this country at multi-year highs. Youth unemployment, as was reported in the Telegraph yesterday, growing at the fastest rate in the G7. So I'm sorry, the whole thing is a disaster. The only way we get out of this doom loop is to do the opposite of what's been happening: reduce state spending and allow contributors, people like the ones watching this program, people who go to work, to keep more of their wages.
Now, one of the particularly concerning trends that we're seeing is a downturn in construction, which often precedes quite deep-seated recessions. The last government talked the talk about building more housing. This government's talking the talk about building more housing. Neither have succeeded. In fact, we've seen a contraction in house building in the last year. What would reform do differently? How would you overcome the very real obstacles that we have in this country to building the millions of new homes that we need, not only for young people to buy, but also just to stimulate our economy?
Yeah, here's what we would do. So number one, we'd have a total legislative reset. At the moment, you have a situation in this country where, number one, he or she who can injunct a process, put a spanner in the works, gets to stop the whole production line for anything, whether that's a nuclear power plant and somebody's concerned about fish and wants to spend £250,000 per fish on that project, whether it's home building. It's the same story. Number two, we need to change how these quangos work. We cannot have situations where people at DEFRA, unaccountable to the electorate because they're quasi-autonomous, they basically are autonomous, totally unaccountable to ministers and the people who voters put into office to make these decisions, being able to stop these things from happening. So yes, of course, we want to protect the environment, but that is ultimately up to ministers and politicians to make those decisions. So we get to the efficient frontier and British people actually get things. I mean, look at other countries, Miriam. Look at what Dubai is building. Look at what China is building. Look at what France is building. We are being put to shame by almost every developed country in the world. And the only way we solve that is a total legislative reset and disempowering the quangos.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private internet access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
I think the major house builders also need breaking up, because the situation we have is 2 or 3 major house builders that completely control the release of housing onto the market. It's not in their interests to flood the market because obviously prices will fall. Do you think that needs looking at?
Not until we actually saw what I think is the primary factor. And look, I broadly, my view is when I talk to these home builders, they actually want to build homes, Miriam. They actually do want to build homes. And when you look into why some of these big projects are just not getting off the ground, it's because they have to interact with 4 or 5 different government departments on different processes. One was giving me an anecdote, by the way, a really big brownfield project they were trying to get up and running. They spent a year and a half going through all of the approvals, including DEFRA, and then all of a sudden they were told, oh, you've got to have a GP surgery in there as well. So they had to go to the NHS, delayed it by another year. Just when they finally got the specification of the GP surgery, they were told right at the 11th hour, oh, we've changed it now, you'll wait and you'll hear back from us. Obviously, during that entire time, they've had to pay for the option value of the land, and British people, particularly young people, Miriam, are being totally betrayed here. Most of the, a greater proportion of young people in this country are not even moving out of their parents' homes because they can't even rent a place at the moment. That's partly because of obviously the population explosion, which people watching this show will be familiar with. It is also because of problems like that. So look, we can look at competition issues. From what I can tell, this is a regulatory issue and a lack of political will.
Zia, you had 3 big council election wins. That's been a trend over the last year for Reform UK. If you got into office, you're facing down potentially quite a lot here. You're talking about civil service reform, House of Lords reform. You won't have any political experience unless you bring some Tories into the fold. How on earth are you going to tackle all these things on top of a failing economy?
We'll start preparing early, which we've already done, years out from a general election, and we've already begun that preparation. Look, no one says this is going to be easy. The differential relative to anyone else who's tried it is, A, we have a political leader. We'll have a Prime Minister, Nigel Farage, who not only believes in this, but I can tell you will go to the wall on these issues. We will have 350 to 400 MPs. That's obviously what we're aiming for, who will vote this stuff through. And yes, we'll be prepared with thousands of pages of legislation ready to go on day one. And importantly, put what we plan to do in our manifesto so that the British people will give us a mandate to do those things. So those institutions that try to stand in the way, we will have the moral high ground in saying you are standing in the way of the will of the British people. In terms of experience, we've already got Danny Kruger, who's leading that preparation for government work. People don't hear from Danny as much as perhaps other people in Reform. I can tell you he's super busy behind the scenes working on all of that stuff. So look, we are clear-eyed about how challenging it's going to be. We have to basically undo 15, 18 years of constitutional vandalism in the space of a few years. But we are up for that challenge, and we're confident we'll succeed.
One other question is here, because at the moment we're talking about the economy, but you don't have a spokesman, at least, for the economy yet. You don't have a shadow chancellor. When will we hear who your front bench team might be in the coming years? When will we expect to hear from you on that?
Yeah, as Nigel has said, we are in talent acquisition mode at the moment. I mean, it's not just Shadow Chancellor. There's any number of ministries and the highest officers of the land that Nigel has not yet named. The British people will, of course, expect to see who those people are prior to a general election. I think you should expect that much closer to a general election. I mean, look, we're trying to, one of the symptoms of, well, one of the big problems the country has had is also a competence deficit, right? We've had Matt Hancock as the health secretary in this country during the greatest health emergency since World War II. We have Rachel Reeves as a chancellor. We have Ed Miliband as our energy secretary. I defy you to find anyone in the country worse suited to sit in those positions. So we have a competence deficit. We want to reverse all of that. We want to bring the very best people in the country with immense track records of.
What job are you going to do, Zia?
Delivery.
What job are you going to do?
Well, that'll be a decision for Nigel much closer to the general election. I'll serve, if Nigel wants me to serve, I'll serve in whatever role he wants. But on a serious point, I don't think this right now is, I think the British people, when you talk to voters, they understand that if you want to have the best possible team, and we are talking some exceptional people. I think people will be very surprised about some of the people, particularly from the private sector, who would be willing to serve in a Nigel Farage cabinet. Really, I would call it galactic level talent, names that would stand proud on the world stage. If you want to do that, those people are only frankly going to stick their heads above the parapet much closer to a general election, which is why it makes sense for Nigel to reserve his position.
Just one final question, if I may. You've talked about the welfare state being a runaway train to which the whole economy is attached. I think more and more people are coming to the conclusion that we have to cut welfare spending. But you're now attracting a lot of ex-Labour voters who might be a lot keener on a big state, on a welfare model. How are you going to please everybody with your new coalition?
No, so I think, look, I spent quite a lot of time looking at that sort of detail. I mean, to the degree there's been former Labour voters who've come over, Miriam, as you'll know, a lot of those are red wall voters. And, those red wall voters set their alarm clocks and rise early and go to work and they graft. And so I don't think there's any inconsistency there whatsoever. Nigel's actually been very consistent on this. Nigel's on the side of people who set their alarm clocks. There are some roles that the state needs to take up. For example, we did put pressure on the government to nationalise British Steel because the country came within hours of losing its ability to produce steel. In our country, which would be the most unfathomable national security risk at a time when China's producing more than ever and actually owned British Steel. What does that tell you, right? We've had politicians, frankly, who have been taken for mugs and allowed Britain to be taken for mugs by foreign powers like China.
Okay.
And sadly, that's continuing under this Labour government. So in certain instances, yes, we need the state to step in, but it is clear welfare spending is far too high. We've already laid out £9 billion of cuts by 2029 just in the form of PIP disability payments, and there's a lot more to come.
OK, Zia, but quickly before you go, George has written into us and said, Zia for Prime Minister, perhaps a job maybe in the future, young man. Want the top job one day, Zia?
I'm focused at the moment on May the 1st elections. So let's get that out of the way.
All right, good stuff. Thank you very much for joining us. Head of Policy Reform UK, Zia Yusuf.